The scent of Lauren's expensive perfume still lingered in the hallway as I read her message. It's just close friends this year. Still, I didn't argue. I simply straightened the photo of their wedding I paid for. As that sharp floral note deepened, it smelled less like celebration, more like exclusion wrapped in sugar. While their laughter drifted from the other side of the door, I reread the guest list. The same guest they proudly introduced, a Mr. Charles Monroe, once called me the woman who saved his life. That's when I smiled. My daughter-in-law banned me, but her party just became my legacy. All right, before we dive into this crazy story, do me a favor. Subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. The message came through at 8:17 on a Wednesday morning, a single line from Lauren, wrapped in polite venom. No need to come to the anniversary party this weekend, we're keeping it small. Eleanor Parker read it twice, then set her phone down beside the teapot. Steam curled upward, tracing silver ribbons in the kitchen light. She didn't frown, didn't sigh. 70 years had taught her that outrage gave people too much satisfaction. Instead, she lifted her cup and took a slow sip, letting the quiet settle around her like armor. From the dining room window she could see the last of the dogwoods clinging to their pale blossoms. Spring in Asheville was always a season of pretending, people planting things that might not last, smiling at neighbors they didn't like. Fitting, she thought. Pretending had always been Lauren's specialty. She could picture her daughter-in-law right now, manicured, composed, wearing that tight smile that hid both insecurity and control, the kind of woman who believed that excluding someone was an act of power. Eleanor reached for her reading glasses, not because she needed them, but because it bought her a moment to think. The phone buzzed again. Not Lauren this time, but Patricia Green. Pat. You saw it? Eleanor. I did. Pat. Call Victor, we can turn this around. Patricia never wasted words. 40 years of friendship had refined her instincts to surgical precision. If Patricia said, turn this around, there was leverage to be found somewhere. Eleanor's eyes drifted to the small corkboard near the refrigerator where invitations, notes, and clipped articles lived in quiet layers. Among them, she spotted one embossed card she hadn't noticed before, Lauren's anniversary party invitation. It wasn't addressed to her. Her pulse ticked once. The edges were cream and gold, expensive but impersonal, the kind of invitation people sent to prove a point. She leaned closer, reading the fine print. Hosted by Lauren and Nathan Parker, featuring guest of honor, Charles H. Monroe, financial consultant. Charles Monroe. Eleanor's hand paused midair. The name cracked open a door in her memory she hadn't touched in years. She knew that name, knew the man behind it well. He wasn't just some guest of honor. He was a client she'd once mentored back when she was still teaching financial literacy workshops for young professionals. Charles had been one of her sharpest protégés, ambitious but honest, the kind who remembered loyalty. Interesting. She sat back, stirring her tea absently. So Lauren had invited someone from Eleanor's professional past and hadn't even realized it. That, Eleanor thought, might be the first mistake of many. The kettle clicked behind her, a small metallic punctuation. She rose, refilled the pot, and let her mind settle into the rhythm of planning. Lauren might think she'd won some small social victory by excluding her, but Eleanor understood something deeper. Social gatherings were battlegrounds. Invitations only mattered if the people who received them believed in their power. By noon, the message from Lauren had stopped echoing in her head. Instead, she found herself making a list. Names, places, subtle reminders of the connection she'd nurtured long before Lauren ever entered the Parker family. Patricia's words replayed like quiet counsel. Call Victor. Victor Lane had been Eleanor's attorney for nearly a decade, a man who understood not only estate law, but the delicate machinery of social optics. She typed a brief note to him. Need to discuss family event and optics management. Urgent but discreet. She sent it, then reached for her coat. The late morning sun spilled across the floor, catching on the crystal bowl her husband had given her on their 20th anniversary, 48 years ago. He'd been gone 10 years now, but she could still hear his voice. "Don't let anyone make you small, Ellie." She smiled faintly. "I won't," she murmured. By afternoon, Patricia called. "So what's the move?" Eleanor's tone was calm, almost amused. "Oh, I think we let them have their little party. I just want to see this guest of honor again." Patricia chuckled low. "You're planning something." "I'm planning clarity," Eleanor said, "and I never start a plan without knowing who's really in the room." As the sun began to dip, she took one last look at the invitation on her counter. Cream and gold. Pretty, shallow, forgettable. She placed it back beneath a small brass paperweight shaped like an owl, a gift from her students years ago, and whispered, "You should have known better, Lauren." The kettle hissed softly in reply, as if in agreement. When Eleanor sat down again, she drafted a short message, polite, measured, and deliberate. "Thank you for letting me know, Lauren. I hope the event goes beautifully." She hit send. Then she smiled to herself, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who already saw the board 3 moves ahead. Because now, she thought, she had a reason to show up, and she had every intention of being remembered. The next morning broke with a crisp, deliberate stillness. Mist rolled off the Blue Ridge Hills like smoke, and Eleanor Parker sat by her kitchen window, a legal pad open beside her tea. The words Charles H. Monroe were written in her steady script at the top of the page. Below it, Client 2008, Workshop Attendee, Trust Advisory Program, Mentioned Family Firm. She tapped the pen lightly. Charles had been young then, ambitious, charming, and endlessly curious. He'd stayed after sessions to ask about ethics in business, about responsibility beyond profit. She remembered the hunger in his eyes, not for wealth, but for understanding how influence worked, and now, apparently, he was Lauren's guest of honor. Eleanor's lips curved slightly. Fate, she thought, had a sense of humor. Her phone vibrated. A text from Victor Lane. "Received your message. Come by this afternoon. Discretion guaranteed." She typed back, "2 p.m. works." By the time the clock chimed 2, Eleanor's blue sedan pulled into the small private parking lot behind Victor's law office. He met her in the lobby, tall and deliberate, the kind of man who carried quiet power like a well-tailored suit. "Ellie," he greeted, guiding her toward his office. "I got your note. You said something about a family event?" She sat, unhurried, and folded her hands in her lap. "Lauren and Nathan's anniversary party this weekend. I've been told not to attend." His eyebrows lifted a fraction. "And I assume that doesn't sit right." "It sits just fine," she replied calmly. "I simply think she's made a mistake she doesn't know about yet." Victor smiled faintly. "Go on." "There's a guest being introduced, Charles Monroe. I mentored him years ago. Financial ethics seminars. He's in their circle now. But I suspect Lauren doesn't realize how close our professional relationship was." "Does he owe you anything?" "Only respect," Eleanor said, "and a memory that might make him see things differently when he learns who I am." Victor leaned back, thoughtful. "Then my advice. Don't confront anyone directly. Let recognition happen naturally. It's always more powerful when they realize the truth before you say it." She nodded slowly. "A soft hand." "Exactly. And one more thing. Your estate files are airtight. If this turns into a social skirmish, nothing she says or does can threaten your financial position." Eleanor's eyes flickered with quiet satisfaction. "Good. Then we can keep this entirely in the realm of perception." When she left the office, she didn't drive home immediately. Instead, she took the long way through downtown Asheville, the city humming with its weekend rhythm. Musicians on corners, shopkeepers sweeping their steps, couples walking dogs under hanging baskets of flowers. She loved this town because it remembered its history without needing to apologize for it. Something about that honesty made her feel grounded. At a red light, her phone rang. Patricia. "I talked to the caterer," her friend said briskly. "Guess who ordered an extra place setting this morning?" Eleanor's smile deepened. "I'd guess the guest list isn't as small as Lauren claimed." "That woman couldn't plan a picnic without drama," Patricia muttered. "You're really going to show up?" "Oh, I'll show up," Eleanor said lightly. "But not as an uninvited guest. I'll arrive as someone with every right to be acknowledged." Patricia laughed, the kind of laugh that came from knowing how many times Eleanor had turned a snub into strategy. "Then I'll keep the champagne chilled for the fallout." By evening, Eleanor sat in her study, the fading light catching the silver frames that lined her bookshelves. Students, colleagues, Nathan as a boy. She stopped at one photograph, her teaching group from 2008. There, second from the left, was Charles Monroe, younger, confident, his hand raised mid-question. She studied his expression carefully, tracing the past like a map. He'd once told her, "You see the whole board, Mrs. Parker. Everyone else just watches their own square." And now he was about to see her again, not as a forgotten teacher, but as the quiet force behind the party he thought he was attending. She made a single phone call before bed, to a florist. "Could you deliver a bouquet to the Asheville Country Club tomorrow morning?" she asked. "Roses and white lilacs. Card to read. Congratulations to the Parkers on 10 years of partnership. E. Parker." The florist confirmed, and Eleanor hung up. The gesture was deliberate, polite enough to be gracious, but pointed enough that Lauren would know she hadn't faded quietly into the background. She poured herself one last cup of tea, the kind of simple ritual that steadied her thoughts. Patricia's words from earlier still lingered. "You're really going to show up?" Oh yes, she was. And when she did, she'd bring more than presence. She'd bring context. Because in Asheville, reputations didn't crumble from scandal. They crumbled from quiet truth spoken in the right room. Eleanor leaned back, watching the mist creep over the mountains again. The clock ticked softly. Tomorrow, she would see the guest they didn't expect, and he would remember exactly who she was. The rain had stopped just before dawn, leaving the roads slick and reflective, like glass catching the first light of morning. Eleanor Parker drove through the winding approach to the Asheville Country Club with the kind of composure that came from years of being underestimated. Her silver sedan purred up the hill, tires whispering over wet asphalt. The party wasn't set to begin until 6, but Eleanor had no intention of arriving like a guest. She was there on business, or at least, that was the pretext she'd carefully arranged. A polite email sent the night before to the club's events coordinator had secured her access. "Please ensure the floral delivery for the Parker event is correctly staged in the private dining hall. I'll stop by in the morning to verify placement and delivery signatures." No one questioned her authority. They never did. At 8:45 a.m., she stepped through the arched glass doors of the country club, her trench coat still faintly damp, her gray hair perfectly swept back. The scent of polish and lilies hung in the air. New money's idea of elegance. "Mrs. Parker," the concierge greeted, straightening immediately. "It's a pleasure to see you again." She smiled gently. "Thank you, Alan. I just need a moment to check the arrangements for this evening's event." "Of course. We have the Parkers' anniversary party set for the East Hall. May I escort you?" Eleanor nodded once, and they walked through the marble-floored corridor lined with framed photographs of Asheville's social history, fundraisers, galas, ribbon cuttings. She'd attended many of them back when she was on the education board, back when her name carried quiet weight. That history still lived in these walls, even if Lauren pretended not to see it. In the East Hall, catering staff were already arranging tables draped in ivory linen. The floral centerpiece, the one Eleanor had commissioned, sat perfectly placed near the head table. The card she'd dictated rested discreetly against the vase. Alan hesitated, reading the card's signature. E. Parker, he murmured. His eyes flicked toward her, polite curiosity surfacing. It's correct, Eleanor said smoothly. They'll appreciate the gesture. As she inspected the setup, a familiar voice echoed from the hallway. Mom? Nathan Parker stood just inside the door, jacket unbuttoned, confusion flashing across his face. Morning, Nathan. She didn't turn immediately, only adjusted a flower stem that leaned out of symmetry. I wanted to make sure everything looked appropriate for your celebration. He blinked. You, came early? I like things done properly, she replied, still composed. Lauren has excellent taste, of course, but details matter. Nathan glanced toward the staff, then back to her. Lauren didn't mention you'd be involved. Of course not. She faced him fully now, her tone even but her eyes steady. I didn't want to trouble her with logistics. You both have enough to think about. He nodded uncertainly, torn between relief and apprehension. Well, it looks great. Thank you. That's what family does, she said lightly. Nathan's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced down, frowned, then excused himself. Eleanor didn't need to ask who was on the other end. A moment later, she heard brisk footsteps approaching, the rhythm of heels that announced Lauren before she appeared. Lauren entered with her polished smile already straining. Eleanor? She said, voice too bright. What a surprise. Eleanor offered a calm nod. I thought I'd make sure the flowers arrived properly. These country club staff are excellent, but details can be missed. Lauren's eyes flicked toward the centerpiece, then to Alan, who stood awkwardly by the doorway. Thank you, Alan. You can finish up elsewhere. Once he was gone, Lauren's smile dropped half an inch. You really shouldn't be here. I'm not attending, Eleanor said evenly, merely ensuring the event bearing my family's name reflects the right tone. Lauren's breath caught, just for a moment, but she recovered quickly. Well, I suppose that's thoughtful. It is, Eleanor replied, and efficient. Now, I'll get out of your way. Before Lauren could respond, Patricia's voice carried from the hall. There you are, Ellie. Lauren turned, startled. Patricia? Pat entered with the grace of someone who had every right to be wherever she pleased. I was meeting Victor here, she said pleasantly. He's just confirming a few club documents. Victor Lane appeared seconds later, briefcase in hand, nodding politely to both women. Mrs. Parker, he greeted Eleanor with a knowing look. Everything in order? Perfectly, Eleanor said. Victor's gaze lingered on Lauren for a beat. Professional, unreadable. The club had a few legal verifications to confirm regarding family sponsorship accounts, he said smoothly. I've ensured Mrs. Parker's name remains active as a lifetime member. That grants her unrestricted access to all private functions. Lauren's posture stiffened. Excuse me? Victor smiled faintly. Club policy. Her membership predates yours. I thought you'd prefer that clarification now, rather than during the event. Patricia smothered a smile behind her hand. Eleanor lifted her handbag. Well, that settles everything. I'll leave you all to prepare. Lauren stood frozen, her mouth opening, closing, and opening again without sound. Eleanor stepped past her gently, voice calm but carrying enough weight to still the room. Don't worry, dear. I won't make a scene tonight. She paused at the doorway, looking back just long enough to let the moment breathe. I'll just be where I've always belonged. Then she walked out, the click of her heels echoing through the hall, every sound deliberate, measured, unbothered. Outside, the mountain air met her like a quiet reward. She slipped into her car and looked at her reflection in the rearview mirror. Steady eyes, a faint smile. Patricia texted as she started the engine. "That was delicious." Eleanor typed back one line before pulling away. "Oh, my dear, the party hasn't even begun." By the time the evening lights glittered across the hills, the Asheville Country Club glowed with a practiced kind of warmth. Gold lamps, muted laughter, and the faint scent of champagne drifting through the air. The East Hall pulsed softly with music, strings from a live quartet sweeping between conversations. Eleanor Parker entered precisely 15 minutes after the official start. Not early, not late. Exactly on her own time. Her dress was simple navy silk, cut with elegance that didn't compete for attention. She moved with the quiet assurance of someone who knew that power didn't require announcement. Heads turned, some with curiosity, others with mild surprise, but she smiled as if every face there had personally invited her. Lauren stood near the head table, radiant in a sequined gown, her laughter pitched too high as she gestured toward a tall man beside her. His salt and pepper hair caught the chandelier light, his tailored suit immaculate. Charles H. Monroe. Eleanor's pulse didn't quicken, it steadied. She waited until Lauren spotted her, and for one exquisite second, the younger woman's face froze in polite horror. Nathan noticed next, his expression unreadable, somewhere between discomfort and reluctant admiration. Patricia drifted in from the bar like smoke, settling at Eleanor's elbow. "Front row seats?" she murmured. "Ready?" Eleanor's lips curved faintly. "Oh, I think I've been ready for years." When Lauren finally approached, she did it with the brittle smile of a hostess cornered by etiquette. "Eleanor," she said brightly, "you made it after all." "I couldn't resist," Eleanor replied, voice even. "Such a lovely evening, and I hear you've invited Mr. Charles Monroe." Lauren hesitated a fraction too long before gesturing toward him. "Yes, Charles has been a wonderful friend of the family. He's helping Nathan with some financial restructuring." Before she could finish, Charles turned toward Eleanor, his brow furrowing slightly. Then his expression shifted, recognition dawning like light breaking through fog. "Mrs. Parker?" he said, voice warm and certain. Eleanor smiled. "Charles, it's been, goodness, over a decade?" Lauren blinked. "You two know each other?" "Oh, quite well," Eleanor said lightly. "I mentored Charles years ago. He attended my ethics workshops in Asheville. I still have one of your essays in my files, I believe." Charles chuckled, a genuine sound that cut through the hum of the room. "I can't believe this. You're the Eleanor Parker? I wouldn't be in this business without you. You taught me more about integrity than my first 3 bosses combined." Lauren's smile froze in place. Nathan shifted uneasily beside her, adjusting his cufflinks as though he could smooth out the tension. Patricia leaned closer, whispering, "And the first domino tips." Eleanor tilted her head modestly. "You exaggerate, Charles. You did all the hard work yourself. I just made sure you knew which numbers not to trust." He laughed again, attracting the attention of nearby guests. Several turned toward them, curious. "Lauren, Nathan, did you know your mother-in-law basically taught half the financial ethics community in Western North Carolina? Her seminars were legendary." Lauren's cheeks colored, her voice too controlled. "Oh, I had no idea." "I suppose that's understandable," Eleanor said with gentle grace. "I retired before you and Nathan married, but I've kept in touch with a few of my former students. Charles was one of the standouts." Charles nodded emphatically. "She's being modest. She's the reason I even joined the state advisory board. When I saw the invitation with your name, Lauren, I assumed you'd invited her intentionally. I thought, well, what an honor to reconnect." Lauren's laugh came brittle, too thin to disguise itself. Yes. Well, we're thrilled she's here. Patricia coughed delicately behind her glass of champagne. Nathan looked as though he wanted to disappear into his own tuxedo. Eleanor let the moment breathe, savoring the ripple of awareness spreading through the nearby crowd. She could hear the shift, the subtle hush of people realizing there was more to her than the polite label of mother-in-law. When the waiter passed with fresh flutes of champagne, Eleanor accepted one, raising it with a quiet toast toward Charles. To former students who keep their ethics intact in a world that rarely rewards it. Charles returned the gesture, smiling warmly. To the teachers who made it possible. Around them, conversation picked back up. But now, eyes lingered. A few whispered questions floated through the room like drifting smoke. Did you know she taught finance? She's connected to the board? That's her son's mother? Lauren caught those murmurs and stiffened, her smile hardening like glass. Eleanor simply stood, the picture of calm civility. It's remarkable, she said softly. How the past has a way of joining a party whether it's invited or not. Charles laughed, not catching the subtext, but Patricia did. Her grin turned sharp. Lauren glanced toward Nathan, who was staring at the floor, one hand tightening around his glass. Excuse me? Lauren muttered, retreating toward the bar. Eleanor watched her go, her expression unreadable. Then she turned back to Charles, asking a few polite questions about his work. Enough to keep the tone friendly but the message unmistakable. She had influence here, and the guest of honor remembered it. As the quartet shifted into a slower melody, Patricia leaned in again. That, she whispered, was art. Eleanor took another sip of champagne, her eyes following Lauren across the room. It's only the opening movement, she murmured. The real performance begins when the whispers start to spread. Then she smiled, a small private curve of satisfaction as the room began to buzz. The hum of conversation thickened as the evening deepened. Crystal glasses clinked, laughter rose and fell, and somewhere behind the polished bar someone popped another bottle of champagne. Lauren had recovered her hostess smile, though it glimmered like stretched glass under too much strain. Eleanor could see it all from the periphery of the room. She didn't linger in one place long enough to be obvious. Instead, she moved like current, slow, steady, almost invisible, gliding between groups of guests with a grace that made conversation fall open around her. Patricia followed at a casual distance, the consummate observer, sipping a single drink and pretending to scroll her phone. But Eleanor knew her friend wasn't missing a single expression or tone. At the head table, Lauren's voice rose again, controlled but taut. Charles, you must tell everyone how you came to join our advisory project. It's such a perfect match. Charles smiled, turning slightly toward the group gathered around him. Well, to be honest, when I got the invitation, I assumed Mrs. Parker had recommended me. She's the reason I went into consulting in the first place. Lauren's hand tightened around her champagne flute. Oh, really? I didn't realize you two stayed in touch. Off and on, Charles said easily. I've quoted her lectures in half the talks I've given since. In fact, I think one of her case studies is still used by the ethics division in Raleigh. Several guests murmured approvingly. Eleanor caught only fragments. Brilliant woman. That explains her reputation. No wonder he came tonight. Lauren's face remained composed, but her shoulders told a different story. Slightly squared, slightly rigid. Eleanor drifted past the group just as one of the guests turned to her. Mrs. Parker, is it true you advised the State Finance Board years ago? Oh, Eleanor said mildly. That was ages ago. I was asked to consult on a few policy reviews, nothing glamorous. But it did introduce me to some exceptional young minds. Charles laughed warmly. Including me. Her smile deepened. Including you. The ripple of laughter that followed was light, polite, but Eleanor could feel the shift beneath it. Subtle, social, the kind of shift that could tilt a whole room if given time. Nathan appeared at her side then, awkwardly loyal to everyone and no one. "Mom," he said quietly, "can I talk to you for a second?" She turned toward him, eyes soft. "Of course." He led her a few steps away from the cluster of guests, lowering his voice. Can you maybe keep things easy tonight? Lauren's trying to make this event perfect." Eleanor tilted her head slightly. "And am I making it imperfect by existing?" He winced. "That's not what I meant." "I know." Her tone was gentle, but her eyes held him. "You don't have to manage me, Nathan. I've done this dance longer than either of you have been married." Nathan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You always seem so strategic about things." "Only when people confuse good manners with weakness," she said. "Now go help your wife. She looks like she's one guest away from a migraine." He hesitated, then nodded, grateful for the escape. As he retreated, Patricia joined Eleanor, lowering her voice. "The buzz is building. People are asking how Charles knows you, how deep your connection goes. Lauren's PR veneer is cracking." Eleanor sipped her champagne. "Excellent. Slow leaks, not ruptures." "Victor just texted," Patricia added, showing her screen. "All statements thus far are non-actionable, verifiable, and socially advantageous." Eleanor chuckled softly. "That's lawyer speak for keep enjoying yourself." Lauren, meanwhile, had regrouped near the stage, where the string quartet paused between songs. She clinked her glass for attention, launching into a toast that sounded perfectly pleasant on its surface, but every word dripped with control. "And of course, we're so grateful to our dear friends and colleagues who've supported Nathan and me through 10 wonderful years of partnership. We're honored by everyone here tonight, especially those who've helped shape our family's journey." Eleanor caught the pointed glance, subtle, but sharp. She smiled anyway. Charles raised his glass next, unprompted. "If I may add," he said, "the greatest measure of success isn't in the years or the parties. It's in the mentors who guided us before we knew we'd need them. Eleanor Parker embodies that better than anyone I've known." Silence pressed over the room, an elegant, charged silence. Lauren's smile faltered, then froze. Nathan stared down at his drink. Patricia nearly choked, trying not to laugh. Eleanor inclined her head slightly. "That's kind of you, Charles," she said. "Though I think true success is remembering where you came from and who helped you find your footing." The applause that followed was polite, but the whispers that rose behind it were not. Mentor? Family connection? Lauren didn't mention that. From her vantage point near the bar, Eleanor could see the conversation threads splintering like cracks in ice. Guests leaned closer to one another, murmuring her name, connecting dots that Lauren had desperately tried to erase. Patricia leaned in again, her tone gleeful but measured. "They're dissecting every word. She's losing control of the narrative." Eleanor's voice was serene. She never had it. As the music resumed, Lauren stepped away from the table, her hand trembling slightly as she set down her glass. Eleanor watched her cross the room toward Charles, watched the subtle panic hidden behind her smile. Lauren placed a hand on his arm, saying something low, urgent. His eyebrows knit together, confused, maybe even defensive. Eleanor couldn't hear the words, but she didn't need to. She recognized the shift, the telltale moment when someone realized their ally might not be theirs alone. Charles glanced briefly toward Eleanor, expression conflicted. Lauren followed his gaze, and that was the moment it happened. The realization. The first major crack in her perfect evening. Eleanor caught her eyes across the room, calm and unblinking. Lauren looked away first. Patricia whispered beside her, "She knows he knows." Eleanor's voice was quiet but final. "Good. Now we see what she does with that. The music swelled, covering the murmurs, but the air had changed. Denser, electric, full of unspoken things. Eleanor turned toward Patricia, her smile returning, slow and certain. The whispers have started. And those, she said softly, are always louder than the truth. By the time the waitstaff began circulating dessert trays, the room had shifted. The hum of conversation had splintered into dozens of smaller murmurs, each orbiting the same subject: Eleanor Parker. Lauren still smiled. On the surface, she looked composed, almost serene, but her eyes kept darting from one cluster of guests to another, watching the subtle nods and glances she couldn't quite interpret. Eleanor noticed everything. She sat 2 tables away, relaxed, a half-finished glass of champagne before her. Patricia sat opposite, pretending to examine the dessert menu but clearly tracking every flicker of tension like a chess analyst watching the mid-game unfold. The first guest approached Lauren near the bar, a woman in her 50s with a familiar tone of polite curiosity. "Lauren, dear, I had no idea your mother-in-law was the Eleanor Parker. I heard she trained half the consultants in this region. Such a legacy." Lauren's hand froze midair, still holding her drink. "Oh, yes. Eleanor's always been involved in the community." "Involved?" the woman echoed lightly. "She's a legend in Raleigh's financial circles. My husband's firm still uses her audit framework. You must be so proud to have her in the family." Lauren's smile twitched. "Of course, we're all very proud." Across the room, Patricia leaned toward Eleanor. "First pebble in the pond," she murmured. Eleanor didn't look up. "Let's see how many ripples she can manage." Lauren's conversation partner excused herself, replaced almost immediately by another guest, a man with the slick polish of a corporate donor. "Lauren, I had no idea your mother-in-law worked with Charles back in the day. Incredible connection. Were you the one who brought him into your project, or did Eleanor make the introduction?" Lauren blinked. "Oh, well, Charles came through Nathan's firm, actually." "Oh?" the man said, glancing toward Charles, who was now laughing at something Eleanor had said across the room. "That's funny. He mentioned Eleanor was the reason he accepted. Said she was the most ethical mentor he'd ever had. Quite the compliment." Lauren's throat tightened. "Yes, well, Eleanor can be persuasive." The man chuckled. "In the best way, I'm sure." When he walked away, Lauren finally exhaled, a slow breath through clenched teeth. At the next table, Nathan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, watching his wife from afar. His gaze moved between her and his mother, the contrast impossible to ignore. Eleanor radiated ease. Lauren radiated effort. He excused himself from the table and joined her at the bar. "Everything okay?" he asked softly. "Fine," she said too quickly. "Why?" "Because you look like you're about to shatter that glass." Lauren glanced down at the flute in her hand. The stem trembled slightly. "People keep asking about her. About her. This is supposed to be our night." Nathan's tone was even but uneasy. "Maybe that's not a bad thing. She's respected. People like her." Lauren turned sharply. "You mean they like her more?" He hesitated, and in that silence the truth she didn't want to hear pressed between them. Meanwhile, Patricia quietly texted Victor, who'd stationed himself near the back of the hall, half guest, half silent sentinel. Within a minute, her phone buzzed with his reply. "Victor, everything public so far is harmless. All mentions of Eleanor's work are verifiable, and no legal exposure exists. Optics are excellent." Patricia leaned over to show Eleanor. "You're officially bulletproof." Eleanor smiled faintly. "That's what I like to hear." "Lauren looks like she's about to choke on her own image," Patricia whispered. Eleanor's tone was mild, but the edge beneath it was deliberate. "Reputation is a fragile currency. Once people start questioning the story, it depreciates faster than she realizes. As they spoke, a soft laugh rippled from the head table, Charles again, gesturing animatedly as he retold a story from Eleanor's workshops. Guests leaned closer, captivated. And she told us, if you can't defend your decision in front of a mirror, you shouldn't make it at all. That line still sticks with me. The table laughed appreciatively, heads turning toward Eleanor with admiration. Lauren's composure cracked. She excused herself from the bar and swept back toward the table, inserting herself between Charles and another guest mid-laugh. "Charles, perhaps we should let everyone enjoy their dessert," she said, smiling too wide. "Not everyone wants to hear about old office stories." Charles blinked. "Oh, but it's not just an office story, it's about principle. And Mrs. Parker's one of the few who actually lived by hers." A murmur of agreement passed through the group. Eleanor rose slowly, every movement precise. "I think that's quite enough nostalgia for one night," she said gently. "Lauren's right. It's your celebration after all." Lauren looked almost relieved, until Eleanor turned to Charles, her voice quiet but clear. "But I appreciate the reminder, Charles. Sometimes it's good to know our efforts left a mark." The moment landed like a coin dropped in still water. Small sound, long echo. Lauren tried to laugh, but it caught in her throat. "Yes, well, shall we move on to the toast?" "Wonderful idea," Eleanor said, her smile faint but unflinching. "You start." Lauren raised her glass, hands trembling ever so slightly. "To family," she said finally, "and to the people who've helped us reach this point." The crowd echoed politely, glasses raised. Eleanor's gaze lingered on her daughter-in-law across the rim of her glass. Lauren's eyes flickered downward first. Patricia leaned closer again. "The Queen doesn't bow," she whispered. "No," Eleanor murmured. "She lets others kneel out of habit." Nathan looked from one woman to the other, understanding, at last, the balance of power between them. It wasn't loud, it wasn't cruel, but it was absolute. He whispered, almost to himself, "She never even had a chance, did she?" Eleanor didn't answer. Victor appeared at her side then, speaking low so only she could hear. "All clean. Every conversation is traceable. Every statement factually sound. You're untouchable." Eleanor's expression didn't change, but her eyes glimmered faintly under the soft lights. "That's not the goal, Victor." "No?" he asked. "The goal," she said quietly, "is to remind them what untouchable looks like." She lifted her glass again, slow, deliberate, and smiled toward Lauren, whose own smile had finally gone brittle. The room glowed with polite applause, unaware that beneath the warmth of crystal and candlelight, a reckoning had already begun. The transition from dessert to the formal toast dinner was smooth. On the surface, waiters glided through the East Hall clearing plates, refilling wine, resetting the room's symmetry. But under that elegance, tension moved like static. Lauren's laughter rang a little too loud. Nathan's silence had settled into something heavier than politeness. Eleanor didn't need to orchestrate anything further. The evening was already doing her work for her. Still, she wasn't one to leave a board half-played. As the tables were reset for the dinner course, the maitre d' approached her discreetly. "Mrs. Parker," he said quietly, "the seating chart has been updated per Mrs. Parker's, the younger Mrs. Parker's instructions. Would you like to review before we proceed?" Eleanor's smile was soft. "I sent along a few notes earlier. The updates should already reflect those." The man nodded, consulting his list. "Ah, yes. I see them here. Guest adjustments for proximity to Mr. Monroe and family seating." "Perfect," she said, her tone as gentle as a silk thread. "Consistency matters, doesn't it?" When the staff began ushering guests to their assigned tables, Lauren was momentarily occupied greeting a late arrival near the entrance. By the time she turned, she saw it. Eleanor seated directly across from Charles Monroe at the central table, the host's table. Lauren froze mid-sentence. "I'm sorry. What is—" The maitre d' stepped in quickly, his voice polite but firm. "Per the confirmed arrangement, Mrs. Eleanor Parker is seated here. It was adjusted this afternoon to align with prior club membership hierarchy." Club hierarchy. Eleanor hid her satisfaction behind the rim of her glass. She had made certain of that. Victor had too. Lauren recovered enough to force a smile. "Of course," she said, but her tone carried a hairline crack. "I wasn't aware of the change." "My apologies," the maitre d' replied smoothly. "We were told Mrs. Parker's membership precedes all other family accounts. She is classified as a senior member host under club policy." Nathan's eyes darted between them. "Mom, did you—" Eleanor laid a hand on his arm gently, cutting him off. "It's just tradition, Nathan. I've been a member here since you were in high school. It's nothing more than a clerical formality." But the slight lift in her voice, just barely perceptible, told Patricia, seated a few chairs away, that Eleanor was enjoying this more than she'd admit. Lauren sank gracefully into her seat beside Nathan, but the movement was mechanical. The energy around the table had shifted again. Guests leaned subtly toward Eleanor and Charles, drawn by the ease between them. "So, Mrs. Parker," one of them said, "you and Charles must have quite a few stories from those days." "Mostly professional ones," Eleanor replied, smiling. "But I suppose what I appreciated most was that he listened." Charles laughed. "I was terrified not to. She ran a room like a courtroom, sharp questions, no mercy." "Oh, nonsense," Eleanor said. "I simply preferred truth over polish." Lauren's fork slipped against her plate with a soft scrape. Patricia caught the sound, her eyes flicking toward Eleanor. "Polish," Patricia murmured under her breath. She couldn't have chosen a more surgical word. Lauren tried to interject, her voice a little too bright. "Eleanor, why don't you tell everyone about your retirement years? I'm sure they'd rather hear about your garden than—" "Retirement's a funny word," Eleanor said smoothly, not missing a beat. "You never really retire from influence. You just learn where it's best applied." The table chuckled. Nathan gave a small, uneasy smile, clearly torn between pride and discomfort. Victor, from his post near the bar, watched the exchange like an attorney watching a jury. He took a discreet note on his phone, then texted Patricia. "Victor, all statements benign, legal positioning optimal, social optics heavily favor EP." Patricia glanced down, grinned, then typed a quiet reply. "Patricia. And she hasn't even drawn blood yet." Lauren tried again, her tone now slightly brittle. "Charles, maybe you could share more about your firm's latest project. Didn't you say something about expansion?" Charles obliged politely, though halfway through his explanation, another guest interrupted to ask Eleanor's opinion on the same topic. She answered deftly, never overstepping, never showing arrogance, just quiet authority wrapped in warmth. By the time coffee was served, the power structure at the table was obvious to everyone but Lauren. Every conversational thread passed through Eleanor first. Even Charles deferred to her with unspoken respect. Lauren's posture grew stiffer as the minutes passed. Her smile, tight at first, began to flicker at the edges. Patricia leaned slightly toward Eleanor, voice barely above a whisper. "She's unraveling, Ellie. It's like watching someone realize the house they built isn't theirs." Eleanor's gaze didn't shift from her plate. Then perhaps she shouldn't have changed the locks. Nathan set his coffee cup down carefully. "Mom," he said quietly, "you've really taken charge tonight." "I've done nothing," Eleanor said with soft precision. "I'm just sitting where I belong." Lauren glanced up at that, an instinctive flicker of defensiveness. but caught Charles smiling at Eleanor across the table. The realization flickered across her face. She couldn't move Eleanor. Not legally, not socially, not symbolically. The maitre d' approached once more to check on the table. "Everything satisfactory, Mrs. Parker?" he asked politely. Eleanor smiled, serene. "Perfectly. You've done a marvelous job." Lauren opened her mouth to speak, but the staff had already moved on, refilling Eleanor's glass first. Patricia tilted her head, voice low and satisfied. "They're serving you first, dear. That's going to sting." Eleanor took a delicate sip. "Good etiquette," she said softly, "is just power in a prettier dress." Across the table, Lauren's expression cracked again, a flicker of panic buried beneath practiced poise. Nathan noticed, and this time didn't reach for her hand. The main course had been cleared, but the air in the East Hall felt heavier than it had all evening, thick with politeness stretched too thin. A jazz trio had replaced the quartet, their soft tempo giving the illusion of calm. Eleanor sat with her posture impeccable, her napkin folded precisely in her lap, her wineglass half full. Across from her, Lauren swirled her drink with small mechanical movements, her gaze fixed on the tablecloth as though decorum itself might save her. When the laughter at a nearby table swelled and faded, Eleanor spoke, her tone as even as fine glass. "Lauren, I must thank you again for arranging such a beautiful evening. It's not often a family can bring so many circles together, professional, social, and otherwise." Lauren looked up, her smile returning on cue. "Of course, I wanted this night to reflect who we are, our connections, our progress. And your foresight," Eleanor added gently, tilting her head. "After all, not everyone would have realized what an asset Charles Monroe might be to the family." The table fell silent. Even the clink of silverware stilled. Lauren blinked once, her lips parting slightly. Well, yes. Charles has been a great friend to Nathan's firm. We're very grateful." "Oh, certainly," Eleanor said. "Though if I recall, you and Nathan met Charles through one of your corporate functions, didn't you?" Lauren nodded, cautious. "Yes, that's right." Eleanor smiled faintly. "How interesting, because I first met Charles when he was fresh out of graduate school. I remember introducing him to a few people who later joined the same firm Nathan now manages." Across the table, Charles's eyebrows lifted with polite surprise. "You did, actually. That was the start of my consulting work in the Carolinas. I'd almost forgotten the connection." "You never forget the people who open doors for you," Eleanor said, her voice light but carrying. "Even if those doors eventually lead to family dinner parties." The soft chuckle from Charles was echoed around the table, but the laughter didn't reach Lauren. Her color had drained by a shade. Patricia dabbed her lips with her napkin, watching closely. She didn't intervene. She didn't have to. Eleanor's words were delicate, surgical, the kind that drew blood without leaving a visible wound. Nathan, meanwhile, sat frozen between them, his expression unreadable but his mind clearly turning. He looked at his wife, then at his mother. The truth had been sitting in plain sight for years, he realized, and he'd never once connected it. Eleanor had built half of the network Nathan's career depended on, and Lauren, his clever, image-conscious wife, had no idea. "Charles," Eleanor continued, her tone conversational, "do you remember that advisory project in Raleigh? The one where you and I reviewed the ethical compliance proposals?" Charles nodded, smiling. "Of course. That was the one that got me my board appointment. You fought for me in that meeting, didn't you?" Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "I just made sure the right people saw your work. Talent should never be buried under politics." Guests nearby leaned in discreetly. The words, "board appointment," and "fought for me," carried just enough weight to travel. Lauren's smile had gone brittle again. I didn't realize you were involved in that, Eleanor, she said carefully. Oh, just tangentially, Eleanor replied, her tone serene. Victor handled some of the documentation back then. Isn't that right? Victor? From his quiet post near the back, Victor Lane raised his glass slightly, his professional smile impeccable. All handled ethically, cleanly, and, if I may say, rather successfully. A ripple of polite laughter moved through the guests, though Lauren didn't join in. Eleanor turned back to her daughter-in-law. You know, Lauren, I've always admired your ambition. Truly. You remind me of myself at your age, focused, decisive, not afraid to make bold choices. The compliment landed like a dart wrapped in velvet. Lauren managed a stiff laugh. Well, that's kind of you. But, Eleanor continued softly, sometimes the boldest thing we can do is recognize the history behind our own success. So few people have the humility for it. A pause. Then another. Lauren's hand tightened around her napkin, her voice low and trembling at the edge of composure. I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Eleanor met her eyes, calm and unwavering. I think you do. The table went utterly still. Patricia leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg over the other, her expression unreadable. But in her silence was approval. Eleanor had done exactly what she'd come to do. Drawn the battle line without ever raising her voice. Nathan cleared his throat softly, glancing between the two women. Lauren, he said under his breath. Maybe just... But Eleanor cut in, her tone still disarmingly polite. Oh, Nathan, don't worry. We're just reminiscing. Family gatherings are wonderful for that, don't you think? The past always has a way of joining the table, whether it's invited or not. A few guests chuckled, though uneasily. Charles nodded in quiet agreement, clearly unaware of the undercurrent. Victor slipped closer, resting a hand briefly on Patricia's chair. All statements accounted for, he murmured. Every word traceable, every implication defensible. Patricia gave the smallest nod. She's painting the frame, the picture will hang itself. Lauren took a long drink of her wine, her hand trembling now. Her reflection in the glass was pale, ghostly. The power she'd built, every inch of social ground she'd claimed, was being politely repossessed in public view. Eleanor's voice broke the silence one last time, soft as the sigh of crystal against china. You've built a beautiful evening, Lauren, you really have. But I do hope next time, you'll check the guest list a little more carefully. The past has such a charming way of seating itself. The words hung there, honeyed and final. Across the table, Charles caught Eleanor's eye and smiled warmly, grateful, unaware. Around him, the guests exchanged glances that said everything without saying a word. Lauren's smile finally cracked for good. Eleanor lifted her glass again, serene, unbothered. To family, she said, her voice a perfect echo of Lauren's earlier toast, but with none of its desperation. The table raised their glasses automatically, but Lauren didn't. Nathan looked at his wife, then at his mother, and for the first time that night, he didn't know whose side he was on. The dinner plates had been cleared, but the aftermath of Eleanor's calm dismantling lingered like perfume, intangible, yet impossible to ignore. Conversations had shifted tones, voices dipping lower, laughter becoming more careful. By now, the room wasn't just watching Eleanor Parker. It was orbiting her. At first, it was subtle. Two guests leaned together near the champagne tower, whispering with a mixture of awe and intrigue. A few seats away, one of Nathan's clients gestured discreetly toward Eleanor, his brow raised as if recalculating some unseen equation. The rumors moved faster than the music. Worked with half the state board. Mentored Monroe, before Lauren even met him. Did you hear she was one of the founding contributors to the Ethics Trust? Lauren felt every whisper like a pinprick under her skin. She smiled too brightly, nodded too eagerly, laughed an octave too high, doing everything she could to keep control of a room that no longer belonged to her. Across the table, Eleanor spoke with quiet warmth to a pair of guests, her hands folded gracefully, her tone unhurried. She never once raised her voice, never tried to reclaim attention. She didn't need to. Patricia caught the shift first, the way the body language around the table had tilted toward Eleanor. People were leaning in when she spoke, pausing when she smiled. Even silence seemed to follow her cues. "Ellie," Patricia whispered, pretending to fuss with her napkin. "They've stopped orbiting her. You're the sun again." Eleanor's eyes glimmered faintly. Gravity always remembers where it started. Lauren rose from her seat, the motion abrupt enough to draw eyes. "If I could have everyone's attention." Her voice echoed briefly through the hall, louder than she intended. The conversations died down, though the quiet that followed wasn't respect. It was expectation. She forced a smile. "I just wanted to thank everyone again for celebrating our 10th anniversary. Nathan and I—" Eleanor's name rippled through a nearby table in a hushed tone, someone mentioning her mentorship, another recalling a scholarship fund she'd established. The whispers layered like an undertone behind Lauren's voice. Lauren faltered. "Nathan and I are grateful to have so many colleagues, friends, and family gathered together tonight." A beat of silence. Someone clapped politely, then stopped. Charles, perhaps trying to save her, lifted his glass. "A wonderful evening indeed," he said warmly. "And a pleasure to see Mrs. Parker again after so many years. I can't imagine how many of us in this room owe her our starts." The applause that followed was genuine. Too genuine. It wasn't for Lauren's toast. It was for Eleanor. Lauren froze mid-smile. Nathan's hand tightened around his glass, his jaw tensing. He could feel it, the invisible power shift. His wife's meticulously crafted image was disintegrating under the weight of something she couldn't outshine: authenticity. Eleanor merely inclined her head, gracious, almost demure. "You're too kind, Charles. I only ever did what I believed was fair." Patricia leaned back, a quiet smirk playing at her lips. "Fair," she mouthed. "That's going to trend tomorrow." Lauren forced another brittle laugh. "Yes, well, we've all benefited from the guidance of others, haven't we? That's what community is about." But when she looked around, she saw polite smiles that didn't quite reach anyone's eyes. The guests weren't agreeing. They were sympathizing. Nathan noticed the way people looked at his mother now. Not as the frail widow he'd always seen her as, but as someone layered with quiet history, subtle strength, and influence that had clearly outlasted time. He watched as one of his partners leaned closer to Eleanor, asking a question about her work with a local trust. She answered with precision, humor, and grace. He'd never heard her speak that way before. Patricia caught his expression, reading the dawning realization in his eyes. She didn't interrupt. It wasn't her place. Watching a son rediscover his mother was its own kind of poetry. At the far end of the hall, Victor Lane checked his phone, typed a quick message, and approached Eleanor's table. He stopped behind her chair, voice low but crisp. "Everything's holding perfectly," he murmured. "Financial standing verified. Trust accounts locked. Public record visibility favorable." Eleanor's lips curved. "Translation?" "You're not just untouchable, Mrs. Parker," Victor said. "You're trending upward." She gave a soft, knowing nod. "Then let's make sure I stay tasteful while doing it." Lauren had resumed her seat, though her posture was rigid, her breathing shallow. She could feel the shift radiating from every corner, the polite avoidance, the too kind tones of sympathy, the realization that the woman she'd tried to ban from the party had quietly become its centerpiece. Nathan leaned toward her. Lauren, he whispered. You should sit this one out. Her head snapped toward him. What's that supposed to mean? Just let it go. You're making it worse. She looked like she might respond, but her voice failed her. For once, there was nothing left to manage. The jazz trio eased into a slower number, the kind meant to close out the night, and for the first time, Lauren didn't rise to lead. Eleanor did. She stood, not dramatically, not commanding attention, but simply existing in a way that drew it. She turned to the musician, thanked him quietly, and the gesture alone was enough to spark another round of soft applause. Charles stood too, following her lead. Others mirrored him. Patricia whispered, almost reverently, and there it is, the pivot. The night's hers now. Eleanor turned slightly, her gaze sweeping the room. Not arrogance, just presence. She caught Lauren's eyes and held them, long enough for the message to land. You lost this battle the moment you made it public. Then, with practiced elegance, she raised her glass once more. To good company, she said softly. And to the people who remind us that true connection never fades. The crowd responded, sincere this time. Glasses clinked. Smiles softened. Lauren stayed seated, invisible in her own celebration. As the applause faded, Patricia leaned in, whispering like a prophecy. They'll be talking about this night for years, Ellie, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. Eleanor smiled faintly, her eyes glinting in the candlelight. That's how real power speaks. And as the final toast shimmered through the room, it was clear to everyone present. Lauren had hosted the party. But Eleanor had claimed it. Morning light filtered through thin mist the next day, softening the sharp edges of Asheville's skyline. The Parker estate sat quiet, a fragile calm settling after the storm of the previous night. Eleanor was already awake, seated in the solarium with a steaming cup of Darjeeling and her reading glasses balanced low on her nose. Her phone buzzed once on the table beside her, a message from Victor Lane. Victor. Documents finalized. Meeting scheduled at 10. Bring Nathan and Lauren. She smiled faintly, always efficient, always precise. Patricia arrived just after 9, carrying 2 croissants and the kind of look only a lifelong friend could wear. Half amusement, half admiration. Sleep well, Queen of the Country Club? Eleanor poured her a cup of tea. Like a woman who didn't have to raise her voice to win. Patricia chuckled, tearing her croissant in half. They'll never recover from that toast. Lauren looked like she'd swallowed a chandelier. Let's not gloat, Eleanor said, though her tone made it clear she was doing exactly that. We have a more practical performance ahead. At 10 sharp, Victor's black sedan pulled into the driveway. He emerged with a briefcase, his composure as crisp as his charcoal suit. Sophie Kim followed, a younger woman in a sleek blazer, her expression calm but alert. Eleanor greeted them both warmly. Victor. Sophie. Thank you for coming. Of course, Victor said. We'll keep it concise. Nathan and Lauren entered moments later, tension following them like a shadow. Nathan looked tired. Lauren looked brittle, her poise still fractured from the night before. Mom, Nathan began carefully. Victor said we needed to meet about the trust accounts. I thought everything was already settled. Eleanor gestured toward the seating area, her tone serene. It is settled. Today's just a clarification. Lauren hesitated but sat beside Nathan, her posture stiff. A clarification of what? Exactly. Victor opened his briefcase with a soft click. Of authority, he said smoothly. Mrs. Parker wanted to ensure all family estate, trust, and property oversight was fully aligned with updated legal designations. Lauren's eyes narrowed. Aligned how? Sophie stepped forward, placing a set of folders neatly on the coffee table. As of last quarter, Mrs. Parker retained primary authority on the family trust, charitable distributions, and joint investment vehicles. Those designations were never amended. Nathan frowned. Wait, I thought you transferred that authority when you downsized your assets. I delegated, Eleanor corrected gently. Delegating is not the same as relinquishing. Patricia took a slow sip of tea, watching Lauren's complexion pale. Victor continued, legally speaking, all transactions and partnerships involving Parker Holdings still require Mrs. Parker's co-signature. That includes property transfers, trust disbursements, and equity investments connected to Nathan's firm. Lauren's voice dropped. That can't be right. It's not only right, Victor said calmly. It's documented. Sophie, show them Exhibit C. Sophie handed over the papers, a collection of notarized forms, updated after Eleanor's husband's passing a decade earlier. Eleanor had never rescinded them. Nathan skimmed the pages, confusion tightening his features. Mom, why didn't you ever mention this? You never asked, Eleanor said softly. You were busy building. I preferred to watch you build. Lauren's tone sharpened. So what? You've been monitoring our finances behind the scenes? Not monitoring, Eleanor said. Protecting. You'd be surprised how many ambitious people marry into families and forget which name built the foundation. The air went taut. Patricia didn't move. Sophie didn't blink. Nathan shifted uncomfortably. Lauren didn't what? Eleanor interrupted, still calm. Didn't think a retired teacher could read a balance sheet? Didn't assume I'd keep my own counsel? Victor leaned forward. Mrs. Parker's authority is comprehensive, Nathan. It's what your father wanted. Stability, legacy, integrity. Nothing can be altered without her consent. Lauren's lips trembled faintly. So you're saying, what? That she controls everything? Eleanor smiled, not cruelly, but like someone unveiling a secret long earned. Control is such an unkind word. Let's call it stewardship. Families work best when someone remembers the rules. Sophie, professional as ever, added. And for the record, all accounts remain fully secure. The charitable foundations too. The local paper's piece on last night's event went live this morning, Mrs. Parker. Public response has been overwhelmingly positive. Lauren looked up sharply. Piece? Sophie turned her tablet toward her. The headline glowed across the screen. Eleanor Parker, the woman who quietly built Asheville's ethic of integrity. Below it, a photo, Eleanor mid-toast, candlelight reflecting off her calm expression. Lauren wasn't even in the frame. Patricia stifled a grin. Well, that's poetic timing. Nathan sank back into the sofa, the fight leaving his shoulders. Mom, I had no idea. I know, Eleanor said gently. That's how it was meant to be. Lauren sat frozen, her painted nails tapping soundlessly against her knee. Every move she'd made to exclude Eleanor had only tightened the web around her. Victor closed his briefcase with a soft snap. Everything's in order. You're well protected, Mrs. Parker. Eleanor nodded, eyes fixed on her daughter-in-law. That's all I ever wanted, for the family to be secure. Lauren tried to muster her voice, her dignity. And what exactly do you want us to do now? Eleanor's answer was a whisper wrapped in steel. Understand the difference between inheritance and entitlement. Patricia set her cup down, the faintest smile ghosting her lips. Checkmate. Lauren's eyes glistened, not with tears, but with recognition. She wasn't the architect of this house. She was a guest in it. Eleanor stood, graceful and unhurried. I have a luncheon at the club, she said. Sophie, would you be so kind as to send the finalized report to my office? Already done, Sophie replied. As she walked toward the door, sunlight glinted against the window pane, catching the faint gold of Eleanor's bracelet, a gift from her late husband engraved with 2 words, Hold steady. And she did. The luncheon at the Asheville Country Club was, on the surface, genteel. Sunlight filtered through beveled windows, spilling across polished wood tables and the shimmer of crystal glassware. Conversation floated lightly: local philanthropy, upcoming board elections, a hint of gossip about who might chair next year's gala. But beneath the polite hum, everyone knew that last night's party had become this morning's story. And at the center of that story sat Eleanor Parker. She didn't have to perform. She didn't chase attention. She simply radiated it. Dressed in dove-gray linen with her pearls resting perfectly at her collarbone, she sat between Victor and Patricia, every inch composed. Across the table, Nathan stirred his coffee, silent, thoughtful. He looked at his mother with new eyes, seeing, perhaps for the first time, not a parent, but a strategist. A woman who understood leverage the way some understood art. Lauren, seated opposite, tried to meet Eleanor's serenity with her own polished composure. But the effort was visible. The set jaw, the measured smile, the faint tremor when she lifted her glass. It was Patricia who broke the quiet tension first, her tone bright and conversational. "So, Ellie, I heard the chamber wants you to speak at their ethics symposium next month. They said your name's become something of a, what was the phrase? Standard of professional integrity." Eleanor smiled faintly, eyes never leaving her teacup. "Oh, I'm not sure I deserve such hyperbole. I've simply lived long enough to see how short memories can be." Victor chuckled softly. "And how valuable a good reputation becomes when everyone else trades theirs for speed." Several guests at the nearby table, mid-level executives, a few local dignitaries, turned subtly toward her conversation, pretending not to listen but clearly doing exactly that. Lauren noticed. "Reputation is important," she said quickly, forcing a warm laugh. "But in business, agility matters just as much, don't you think?" Eleanor met her eyes gently. "Agility without direction only makes a person spin in circles, dear." A ripple of polite laughter followed, soft, knowing, and entirely one-sided. Lauren's cheeks flushed, but she maintained her smile. Nathan took a slow sip of his coffee. The lesson wasn't lost on him. He'd watched his wife build their social image like a brand campaign, meticulously crafted, beautifully lit, and dangerously hollow. His mother, on the other hand, had built something quieter but enduring: credibility. Patricia, ever the observer, leaned toward Victor. "I do hope someone's recording this," she murmured. "It's not every day you watch a masterclass in polite dismantling." Victor adjusted his glasses, smirking slightly. "Every statement she's made in the last 12 hours has been legally spotless. If Lauren tries to spin this, she'll look petty. If she stays silent, she disappears." Elegant cornering. Eleanor's tone remained light, as if none of it mattered. "Lauren, you've built quite the social network here. That takes effort. But I've learned something over the years. Networking is just architecture without a foundation if you don't know where your integrity lives." The table went quiet for a heartbeat too long. Lauren forced another smile, but her voice betrayed strain. "Well, I'm sure we all have room to improve." Eleanor nodded once, graciously. "Of course. Growth is a lifelong process. Some of us just start earlier." Patricia nearly choked on her mimosa. Eleanor dabbed at her mouth with a linen napkin, entirely serene. "The key, I've found, is understanding leverage. In families, in business, in communities. It's never about who holds it, but who knows when to use it." She looked toward Nathan then, a mother's gaze softened by pride. "Your father used to say, 'Power handled loudly burns fast. Power handled quietly lasts generations.' I think that's still true." Nathan nodded, quietly reverent. He was right. Lauren's fork clinked against her plate. "And what about forgiveness?" she asked, voice carefully even. Surely there's room for that too. Eleanor's smile was kind, but her eyes didn't waver. Forgiveness is for accidents, dear. This was strategy. The table stilled again, half the guests pretending not to hear, the other half hanging on every word. Patricia whispered, "That line belongs in a quote book." Victor leaned slightly toward Eleanor. "I've reviewed the coverage again," he murmured. "Public sentiment is 90% favorable. You've managed to become both loved and untouchable, a rare balance." Eleanor's gaze softened as she folded her napkin. "Then I'll use that favor wisely. A legacy should be more than money. It should be a standard." Lauren stared down at her untouched dessert, her reflection fractured in the silver spoon. She'd lost every visible piece of control and couldn't even fight back without sounding resentful. Every move she made now would look like defiance against grace. Nathan reached across the table, his hand brushing hers briefly. It wasn't comfort. It was acknowledgement. A quiet truce. But even he couldn't save the illusion she'd built. Patricia checked her watch, then rose smoothly. "Ellie, shall we walk the garden before your next meeting?" "Of course." As they stood, Eleanor turned to the others with her usual composure. "Victor, thank you again for your time. Sophie, we'll speak this evening about the scholarship fund allocation." Sophie nodded. "It's already in draft. We'll ensure the release highlights your continued philanthropic leadership." Lauren blinked. "Release?" Victor smiled. "Press statement. It was inevitable after last night's coverage." Eleanor's tone was effortless. "We'll frame it as a lesson in family values, trust, ethics, unity. The irony, of course, will be entirely lost on the public." Lauren's voice cracked before she could stop it. "You're turning this into a brand?" Eleanor tilted her head. "No, dear, into a standard." Patricia looped her arm through Eleanor's as they walked toward the veranda, sunlight spilling ahead of them. Behind them, Nathan exhaled slowly, realization dawning that his mother's restraint wasn't gentleness, it was strategy perfected. Victor gathered his files, his tone low but final. "All protections hold. She's beyond reach now." Lauren watched Eleanor step into the sunlight, her pearls catching the morning glow, her posture unbroken. And for the first time, Lauren understood. She hadn't been outmatched. She'd been outclassed. 3 days after the luncheon, the Asheville Country Club hosted its spring charity breakfast, a polished affair of linen, laughter, and old money performing benevolence. But this year's event was different. The whispers weren't about the mayor's new development plan or the board election. They were about Eleanor Parker. She entered the room without fanfare, in a pale blue suit that matched the sky beyond the bay windows. Her arrival was noted but not announced, yet every conversation softened when she passed. People had begun lowering their voices around her not out of fear, but respect. At her table near the front, Patricia adjusted her scarf and leaned over. "Half the room's here to see what you'll do next, Ellie. The other half's here to pretend they're not." Eleanor smiled, pouring cream into her coffee. "Then let's make it worth their while." Across the hall, Nathan and Lauren arrived late. He looked resigned, his tie slightly loose. She looked immaculate but hollow, every smile calculated and timed. When she spotted her mother-in-law already seated beside the keynote speaker, her face faltered just slightly, just enough for Patricia to notice. "Chessboard hasn't changed," Patricia murmured, "only the lighting." Eleanor's attention remained on the podium, where the event director was introducing her with a warmth that bordered on reverence. "And as many of you read this week, Mrs. Parker has long been a guiding hand in our city's ethical and financial initiatives. We are honored she'll share her next chapter with us today." Eleanor rose slowly, applause rippling through the hall like a tide that built, crested, and didn't quite fade. She took her time reaching the podium, her every movement deliberate, her calm cutting through the morning noise. "Good morning," she began, her voice low but resonant. "As you all know, I've spent much of my life teaching others how to manage wealth responsibly. But time has a way of teaching us too. And what it's taught me is that wealth is useless if it doesn't outlive you with purpose." Lauren shifted in her seat, visibly tense. Nathan watched silently. "I believe it's time to turn the next page," Eleanor continued. "So today, I'm pleased to announce a new initiative, the Parker Endowment for Ethical Education." A murmur moved through the room. Cameras clicked softly. Eleanor smiled faintly. "The endowment will fund scholarships, mentorships, and community programs for women and young professionals entering financial ethics, business, and governance. It's a long-term commitment, one I've ensured will continue regardless of who manages my estate." Patricia's eyes twinkled. "Oh, here it comes," she whispered under her breath. Eleanor gestured toward Victor, who stood near the front table. "Victor Lane, my attorney, will ensure the foundation's independence. All contributions are fully endowed, irrevocable, and managed under third-party oversight. It cannot be altered, redirected, or absorbed." Victor gave a professional nod. "Every cent is protected and permanent." The applause this time was stronger, admiration mixed with genuine awe. Eleanor let the moment settle. Then she glanced toward Nathan and Lauren. Her tone softened. "My late husband believed legacy wasn't measured in wealth, but in the impact we leave behind. This," she gestured toward the audience, "the cause, the city itself, is ours to steward, not to spend." Lauren's lips parted in disbelief, but she caught herself, forcing another brittle smile. Nathan, however, looked down, shame and pride twisting quietly inside him. A guest from the Rotary table called out, "Mrs. Parker, will your family continue to oversee the endowment?" Eleanor met his question with a graceful pause. "The family will continue to benefit from its example," she said. "But its direction will remain independent. True generosity doesn't ask permission." A ripple of approving laughter followed. Even those who didn't understand the undertone admired the polish of it. Patricia leaned back in her chair, whispering, "You've just written her out of history with applause." Eleanor's eyes softened. "No, I've just reminded her what history remembers." After the event, reporters circled like well-trained bees asking for statements. Eleanor gave them a few measured quotes. Nothing flashy, nothing headline-chasing. "Integrity is currency that never devalues. Every generation should earn its own reflection." Each phrase was perfectly quotable, and every camera caught Lauren's frozen smile in the background. Victor joined Eleanor as the crowd began to thin. "It's done," he said quietly. "The filings are processed, trust accounts realigned, the endowment's untouchable, just like we planned." "Good," Eleanor replied. "Then let them feel generous for supporting it." Nathan approached then, hands in his pockets, looking 10 years older than the last time she'd truly seen him. "Mom," he said quietly, "you didn't tell me you were planning this." She touched his arm gently. "You weren't ready to hear it. You needed to see it." Lauren stood just behind him, her voice tight. "So this is it? You've made yourself the saint of Asheville and we're just supposed to smile for the cameras?" Eleanor's reply was soft, almost pitying. "No, Lauren. You're supposed to learn from them." Lauren blinked, speechless. Patricia appeared at Eleanor's side, murmuring with a smile, "They still don't understand this isn't revenge, it's order." "Exactly," Eleanor said. "The kind that doesn't need permission to exist." Victor slipped his phone from his pocket, reading a message aloud. "Local news has already published the announcement. The foundation's trending. You're being called Asheville's moral compass." Eleanor didn't react, only glanced out the window at the gardens below, sunlight catching in her hair like a quiet crown. "Moral compass," she repeated. How ironic. Patricia raised her glass of orange juice in a mock toast. To irony. Eleanor clinked it lightly. To legacy. The applause still echoed faintly through the hall as she stepped down from the podium, cameras flashing behind her. Lauren sat frozen, watching the crowd surge around Eleanor, every handshake and smile erasing her own name a little more from the narrative she'd tried to own. Eleanor didn't look back. 2 weeks later, the Parker estate no longer buzzed with gossip. It hummed with reverence. The whispers that once questioned Eleanor's restraint now praised it. Her name had become shorthand for grace wrapped in precision, influence disguised as humility. Every major Asheville publication had run a story about the Parker Endowment for Ethical Education. The phrasing varied, but the sentiment was the same. Eleanor Parker has redefined legacy for a new generation. Nathan read one of the articles at the breakfast table, the words blurring as he stared at them. The photo was unmistakable, his mother smiling at the camera, posture serene, eyes bright, pearls gleaming. Lauren stood blurred in the background, her expression unreadable. "She's on the front page again," he said quietly. Lauren looked up from her untouched coffee. "She's not even pretending to be subtle anymore." "Maybe she doesn't have to be," Nathan replied. "She's earned it." Lauren's laugh was brittle. "Earned it? You mean she planned it?" Every headline, every photo, every carefully chosen word. "This isn't generosity, Nathan. It's control dressed in philanthropy." He looked at her for a long moment, something like exhaustion behind his eyes. Maybe control isn't always a bad thing, especially when it's done right. Lauren's jaw tightened. "So that's it? You're siding with her?" "I'm not siding with anyone," he said. "I'm finally seeing her clearly." He folded the paper and stood, leaving her alone in the silence she'd built around herself. That afternoon, Patricia and Victor met Eleanor in her study, sunlight painting geometric patterns across the polished mahogany desk. The air smelled faintly of lilac and parchment, the scent of permanence. Victor placed a set of embossed folders on the desk. "Everything's finalized," he said, voice smooth and steady. "Estate, trust, endowment, all sealed. No revisions, no loopholes. Every clause reinforces your autonomy." Patricia smiled, swirling the ice in her glass of sparkling water. Translation: no one can touch a dime unless she lets them. Victor nodded. "That's accurate." Eleanor closed the folder gently. "Thank you, Victor. You've done beautifully." He gave a faint, knowing smile. "I merely executed what you designed. Every safeguard, every clause, every contingency. It's meticulous. You've essentially turned your estate into a moral contract." Patricia grinned. "A moral contract? That's poetic. And ironic. Given the people who will never grasp it." Eleanor gazed out the window where the dogwoods had just begun to bloom. "It wasn't about punishment," she said softly. "It was about proof. People like Lauren think influence is inherited. But influence is cultivated." Patricia leaned back in her chair. "And you've cultivated an entire city's admiration without raising your voice once." Eleanor's lips curved faintly. "Patience and perception, my dear. The two currencies that never lose value." Victor cleared his throat, glancing at his phone. "Speaking of perception," he said, "I received a call this morning from Asheville Current. They're producing a feature on modern matriarchs and the subtle mechanics of power. They want you for the cover story." Patricia's eyes widened. "A cover story? Ellie, that's monumental." Eleanor looked at Victor, her expression unreadable. "And what's the angle?" "Grace in governance," Victor replied. "They want to explore how you've blended ethics, philanthropy, and family legacy into what they're calling the Parker Principle." Patricia nearly laughed. "The Parker Principle? You've officially become a brand." Eleanor tilted her head slightly, absorbing the words with quiet amusement. The Parker principle, she repeated softly. Interesting. Tell them I'll think about it. Victor smiled faintly. They'll be persistent. It's not just about the endowment. It's about you, the way you've reshaped how influence looks in this town. You're the story everyone's trying to tell. Patricia reached over and squeezed Eleanor's hand. You should do it, Ellie. Not for them, for yourself. Let them document what real power looks like before the imitators rewrite it. Eleanor considered this, her eyes drifting toward the framed photograph on the mantel, her late husband, standing beside her in their old garden, his arm around her shoulders. Beneath it sat a small brass plaque engraved with his favorite phrase, "Hold steady." She smiled faintly. Your timing, as always, is impeccable, Richard. Patricia glanced toward the photo. He'd be proud, you know. You've preserved what he built, and you've made sure no one could cheapen it. Eleanor's gaze lingered on the photograph. He believed in integrity above all else. I just made sure the world remembered that name meant something. Victor rose, gathering his things. The world's already remembering, and they're remembering the right Parker. After he left, Patricia refilled both their glasses, the delicate fizz of sparkling water filling the pause between them. So, Patricia said, raising her glass, what's next? You've redefined philanthropy, turned social perception into art, and reclaimed your family name. What's left for a woman who already won? Eleanor's eyes moved toward the window, where the light filtered through the budding branches. Her voice was quiet but sure. Winning isn't the point, Pat. It's knowing the game won't continue without your rules. Patricia's smile widened. And what happens when they finally realize that? Eleanor turned back, her gaze calm and certain. They'll thank me. At that moment, her phone chimed. A new message. She glanced at the screen, reading it once, then handed it silently to Patricia. The sender, Megan Ortiz, Editor-in-Chief, Asheville Current. The subject line, front cover confirmed, The Parker Principle, How One Woman Quietly Redefined Power. Patricia exhaled, half in awe. Ellie, they've already chosen the title. Eleanor smiled, the faintest glint of irony in her eyes. Then I suppose we give them the story they deserve? Outside, the dogwood stirred in the breeze, petals scattering across the lawn like soft confetti. Inside, Eleanor closed the folder marked Parker Legacy Trust, placed it neatly on the desk, and whispered almost to herself, Control is never taken. It's remembered. The following Sunday morning unfolded like a quiet coronation. Asheville's spring sunlight spilled over the Parker estate, settling on the wide porch where Eleanor Parker sat with her tea service laid out just so. Silver polished, lemon wedges perfectly arranged, a stack of correspondence at her elbow. The serenity wasn't performance, it was possession. In the distance, she could hear the faint hum of church bells from downtown. Years ago, she might have been in those pews, surrounded by well-meaning gossip and practiced smiles. Today, she didn't need the congregation. The congregation came to her, through phone calls, interviews, invitations, and discreet gestures of deference that arrived like clockwork. Patricia sat opposite her in a wide wicker chair, sunglasses perched low on her nose. You've achieved it, Ellie, she said softly, the kind of peace that only comes when no one dares disturb it. Eleanor poured a second cup of tea, steady and unhurried. Peace isn't quiet, Pat. It's control disguised as calm. Patricia laughed under her breath. Only you would define serenity like a strategist. Before Eleanor could reply, the front gate buzzed. Sophie's voice came through the intercom, bright and efficient. Mrs. Parker, Victor Lane is here to see you. He said you requested a quick review. Send him in, Eleanor said. Moments later, Victor appeared at the edge of the porch, his briefcase in hand, his usual calm precision intact. Good morning, he greeted. I thought you might want the finalized statement before publication. Eleanor gestured toward the table. Sit, Victor. Tea? He declined with a polite wave. I'm still recovering from the last interview with Asheville Current. They're calling you the city's quiet architect. Patricia smirked. They're not wrong. Victor opened his folder, laying out a series of documents with crisp efficiency. All assets, trusts, and charitable disbursements remain fully protected. The Parker Endowment is now under federal nonprofit status with private advisory oversight. The structure you designed guarantees independence in perpetuity. Eleanor listened, sipping her tea, the faintest nod confirming her satisfaction. And the family? She asked. Victor's tone stayed even. Nathan has full access to his personal business accounts, but any shared Parker holdings remain co-signed under your authority. Lauren's proposed community venture was, shall we say, politely declined by the board. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Politely? Victor smiled faintly. They thanked her for her enthusiasm and suggested she observe future initiatives before proposing her own. Eleanor didn't gloat. She didn't have to. Her victory had evolved beyond vindication. Good, she said softly. Observation can be educational. Victor slid a final envelope across the table. There's also this, the next charitable allocation proposal. The Asheville Women's Financial Collective reached out yesterday. They'd like to partner on mentorship programs inspired by your ethics model. Patricia exhaled in delight. They're not just following you, Ellie. They're institutionalizing you. Eleanor opened the envelope, scanning the contents. A fitting next step, she said. We'll allocate matching funds. But I want the program named after the community, not me. No monuments while I'm still breathing. Victor chuckled. You do realize that's precisely why they'll build one anyway. Eleanor set down the papers and folded her hands in her lap, eyes drifting to the garden. Let them. I'd rather be remembered for the systems I left in motion, not the speeches I gave. A breeze moved through the porch, lifting the edges of her notes. Patricia reached out to catch one page before it fluttered away. She glanced at it, smiling. You're already planning the next move, aren't you? Always, Eleanor replied. Legacy without momentum becomes a museum. I prefer something alive. Victor packed his briefcase, standing. Then I'll process the allocation today. Everything remains sealed and secure, Mrs. Parker. You have complete authority. No contest, no exposure. Thank you, Victor, she said, for keeping the world tidy. As he left, Patricia studied her friend in silence for a long moment. You know, she said finally, there was a time when you fought to be heard. Now people repeat your words like gospel. Eleanor smiled faintly, eyes on the horizon. That's because I stopped arguing. The trick isn't volume, it's inevitability. They sat in companionable silence, the sound of the wind blending with the faint clinking of china. Down the hill, the gardeners tended the azaleas, their quiet rhythm a reminder that life, like influence, was cyclical. In the driveway below, Nathan's car pulled in. He stepped out slowly, hands in his pockets, expression hesitant. Lauren remained in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead but making no move to follow. Patricia sighed. The exiled royals have returned. Eleanor rose, brushing invisible lint from her sleeve. Then let's receive them kindly. Grace costs nothing, and it's the one currency they can't counterfeit. Nathan approached the porch steps, his voice soft. Mom, we wanted to apologize for how things unfolded. Eleanor met his gaze, steady and warm. No need. We all play our roles, Nathan. The lesson is in knowing when to stop performing. He nodded, understanding more than he could say. Lauren, however, stayed by the car, her posture unyielding, a silhouette of pride that had forgotten purpose. Eleanor didn't invite her forward, nor dismiss her. She simply turned back to the table and refilled her teacup. The conversation was over before it began. Patricia watched the moment unfold, equal parts pity and admiration. "You've achieved what most people spend lifetimes chasing," she said softly. "Not victory, not even forgiveness, just peace." Eleanor smiled, the faintest trace of warmth in her expression. "Peace isn't given, Pat. It's claimed." As Nathan retreated to the car, Eleanor took a final sip, the delicate china cooling in her hand. The morning was quiet again, exactly as she liked it. Victor's voice echoed faintly from the foyer as he departed. "All systems locked, Mrs. Parker, permanently." Patricia lifted her glass. "So," she said with a knowing grin, "what's next for Asheville's most untouchable woman?" Eleanor gazed out at the garden, sunlight dappling the leaves like flecks of gold. Her voice was soft, but firm. "Next, I think it's time to fund something that outlives even the whispers." The breeze stirred again, carrying the faint sound of church bells down the hill, a melody of endings and beginnings. Eleanor Parker leaned back in her chair, her smile quiet, certain, and utterly unassailable. The night of the Asheville Current feature release felt less like an event and more like a coronation. The country club's ballroom gleamed beneath soft amber chandeliers, the same space that had once hosted Lauren's ill-fated anniversary party. Tonight, however, the guest of honor wasn't a guest at all. She was the standard. Eleanor Parker stood at the edge of the room, a champagne flute in one hand, her posture as composed as the string quartet playing in the corner. Across the ballroom, her photograph, the cover of the magazine, was displayed on a silver easel. Beneath her portrait, the headline read, "The Parker Principle: How One Woman Redefined Power Without Ever Raising Her Voice." The crowd around her rippled with polite laughter and admiration. People wanted to be seen near her now, to quote her, to orbit her. She'd become, as Victor once said, a moral compass for the city. And the irony of it, the elegance of it, was not lost on her. Patricia arrived at her side, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "Ellie," she said softly, passing one over, "you've managed to turn quiet revenge into civic philosophy. That's not power. It's art." Eleanor smiled, eyes on the cover photo. "It was never revenge, Pat. Just correction. People mistake correction for cruelty when it's done precisely." Patricia chuckled, lowering her voice. "And Lauren?" Eleanor's gaze drifted toward the far end of the room. Lauren stood near the entrance with Nathan, her sequined gown glittering under the lights, but her presence dimmed by comparison. She looked every bit the woman trying to reclaim her footing in a room that had already moved on. Nathan noticed Eleanor's glance and gave a small nod, a silent acknowledgement of truth finally seen. He had stopped trying to mediate between his mother and his wife. Some divides weren't meant to be mended. They were meant to teach. Eleanor raised her glass slightly in his direction, a gesture of acceptance. He returned it, eyes full of quiet respect. Lauren, however, stayed frozen in her own stillness, her smile practiced, her laughter brittle. Victor approached then, impeccably dressed, his tone low but satisfied. "Everything is secure," he murmured. "The endowment, the trust, the legacy filings, all permanent. Even if someone tried to contest your decisions, they wouldn't stand a chance." Eleanor nodded once. "Then it's time to stop talking about protection and start enjoying what's been built." Victor smiled faintly. "It's a pleasure, Mrs. Parker, to see strategy executed to completion." Patricia raised her glass in mock salute. "Completion? Victor, you underestimate her. This woman doesn't complete things, she evolves them." Eleanor let out a soft laugh, the sound carrying like silk through the air. "I'm far too old to evolve, Pat. I simply outlast." Guests began to gather near the stage as the event director called for a toast. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice warm with admiration. Tonight we celebrate not only the Parker Endowment's tremendous success, but also the woman whose vision reshaped Asheville's sense of legacy. Please welcome Mrs. Eleanor Parker. A wave of applause moved through the room. Eleanor stepped forward slowly, not dramatic, but deliberate. Even the sound of her heels across the marble floor seemed to command attention without demanding it. She reached the podium, resting her hand lightly on its edge. The applause quieted almost instantly. "Thank you," she began, her voice carrying with measured grace. "When I began this journey, I wasn't seeking recognition. I was seeking order. There's a difference." A few chuckles rippled through the room, but the air stayed reverent. In every family, in every community, there are moments when people forget who built the foundation they stand on. And that's all right. Forgetting is human. But remembering who you are and what your name means, that's the responsibility of those who came before you. Her eyes flicked briefly to Nathan, then, unflinchingly, to Lauren. "I've learned that true power doesn't shout. It doesn't demand to be seen. It simply remains, long after the noise fades." The audience erupted in applause again. Genuine, sustained. Even Lauren clapped, though her face was unreadable. Her pride trapped somewhere between defeat and reluctant respect. Patricia leaned toward Victor. "She's not giving a speech. She's closing a symphony." Victor smiled. "And she's the only one who knows the sheet music." Eleanor raised her glass then, the final movement of her evening. "To grace," she said softly, "to patience, and to the understanding that legacy isn't about ownership, it's about stewardship." The room mirrored her motion, crystal glinting under the lights. As the crowd dispersed, a younger guest, a journalist from the Chronicle, approached shyly. "Mrs. Parker," she said, eyes bright, "your story has inspired so many people. Do you have any final words for those trying to find their own voice?" Eleanor smiled, setting her glass gently on the table. "Yes," she said. "Don't rush to be heard. Let them underestimate you first. It makes the revelation far more satisfying." The journalist laughed softly, not realizing she'd just been handed the essence of the Parker principle. Across the ballroom, Nathan and Lauren approached together. He looked calm now, content. She looked like a woman carrying a lesson that would take years to digest. "Mom," Nathan said quietly, "you were right about everything. About patience. About clarity. I see it now." Eleanor's smile was small but warm. "Good. Then maybe next time you'll trust what's quiet." Lauren hesitated, searching for words. "Eleanor," she managed, her voice soft but sincere. "I misjudged you?" Eleanor tilted her head slightly, her expression kind but firm. "No, dear. You simply misjudged what silence can build." Lauren lowered her eyes. Nathan took her hand, not as a show of unity, but as surrender to understanding. Patricia joined them, glass still in hand, eyes gleaming with pride. "Well, Ellie," she said, "you've officially rewritten the family story, and every person in this room knows it." Eleanor looked around, her gaze sweeping over faces filled with admiration, envy, and acknowledgement. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "it's time I let it speak for itself." She reached for her champagne flute one last time, letting the bubbles catch the light. Her eyes lingered on the magazine cover nearby, the elegant photograph of a woman who had been underestimated, dismissed, and ultimately remembered exactly as she intended. The room quieted as if sensing closure. Eleanor raised her glass slightly, her voice calm, deliberate, and final. "They banned me from the party," she said, her tone edged with wry grace. "But the guest they introduced already knew me, and I let that truth speak louder than words." A murmur of laughter and admiration rippled through the room. Cameras flashed again. And Eleanor Parker, serene, untouchable, and utterly composed, took her final sip of champagne as the music swelled softly around her. The sound of a woman who had turned exclusion into empire, silence into legend.